Hashanah, the first month. It's the beginning of the year. Because the first commandment that we ever had is to make a calendar. That was the first commandment. Rashi says, and the Torah could have started here. It could have started here with this commandment, because this is the first of all the commandments. Why is it the first of all the commandments? Well, obviously, we say it's the first. That means it has a special importance and significance to it. But just practically speaking, in order to leave Egypt, the Jewish people had to separate themselves completely from the idol worship of Egypt. How did they do that? They had to take the idol of the Egyptians and kill it and eat it, lamb chops. On the night of the 14th of Nisan, and then they're going to go out of Egypt. We have a problem. When's the 14th? How do you know when the 14th is? You can't know when the 14th is if you don't know when the first is. So that's why making the first, the mitzvah of making Rosh Chodesh is the most important mitzvah, because that's the start of all the mitzvahs. Now, if you want to say, well, didn't they have couldn't they just get a calendar? Some organization would send them a calendar for a small donation. They have a calendar. No, because the Jewish people make the calendar. How do they make the calendar? There have to be 2 eyewitnesses who see the new moon. What is that? What's a new moon? Well, at the end of it, we go on a lunar cycle that every 29 days and a fraction, the moon turns around the earth, circles around the earth is at the center, and after 2 weeks, the moon is full, gets bigger and bigger. And then for 2 weeks, it gets smaller and smaller until it disappears. And once it disappears, then there's no moon. And then it reappears. How does it reappear? Like a fingernail, just a thin sliver of light. Which way are the horns pointing? Artists who like to draw the moon in conjunction with Jewish holidays, like on Hanukkah, they usually get it wrong. They don't know about this. But the moon begins with the horns pointing up to the left. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it's full in 2 weeks' time. So on the 15th of the month, the moon is always full. Our holidays are all on the 15th of the month. Well, not all, but the main ones, 2 out of 3. Pesach, you'll go outside to someone's Seder, you see the full moon. And Sukkot, you'll see a full moon on Sukkot. You go dancing in the street. However, Shavuos is different. Shavuos is not governed by the moon. That's to say, we don't expect to see a full moon on Shavuos, because Shavuos is an extension of Pesach. When do we make Shavuos? Once we know when Nisan starts, and then we get 2 weeks into Nisan, so we have Pesach, and then we count, only after Pesach, we count 49 days. Then it's Shavuos. 7 weeks, 7 days of 7 weeks. It's 49. Each of these days represents an aspect of your character, because we know there's 3 aspects of your mind, Chabad, Chachma Bina Das, and 7 days of the week, which correspond to your 7 midos, the drivers, your character drivers. So we have a week of Chesed, and a week of Gevura, and a week of Tiferes, and a week of Netzach, a week of Hoy, a week of Yesoid, and a week of Malchus. The end of the 7th day of the 7th week is the eve of Shavuos. Then we celebrate Shavuos. So now we've transformed ourselves from being slaves in Egypt to a nation of priests and nobility ready to receive the Torah. Okay, so everything goes according to the moon. All starts with first day of Nisan, Therefore, before this commandment that's why this could be the beginning of all the whole Torah. So then the question goes back again. So if the Torah could have begun this way, that's what Rashi says. The Torah didn't have to begin with any other idea. This is the first idea of all the commandments. This is the beginning of all the commandments. So it's very important Shabbos. So we read this on this Shabbos. Why then? It's a whole debate, by the way. Why should Rosh Hashanah be on the first day of the 7th month? Why isn't it on the first day of the 1st month? Why isn't this coming Rosh Chodesh, Rosh Hashanah? Well, the answer is it is. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is Rosh Hashanah for the months. First day of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for the year. Well, what does Rosh Hashanah celebrate? Rosh Hashanah is a celebration of the creation of mankind. Because Adam, the first man, was created on Rosh Hashanah. So the message of Rosh Hashanah is that every person should look upon himself, that he's a new creation. Hashem just made him to do a special job, which is to make, who knows what the special job is? Come on, you all know we must have said this 100 times.
To make a place here for Hashem.
To make a home, a dwelling place for Hashem in this world, where it seems like he doesn't belong here. The world is void, empty of him. So therefore, we have to do commandments to make the world full of the feeling and the holiness of Hashem. So why wasn't man, the first Adam, created on the first day of Nisan? And the answer is he was. Well, when was it? Was it Tishrei or was it Nisan? And the answer is both. You know, two guys were arguing and somebody came along and said, I say, you guys are really upset with each other. He says, well, he says, you're right. I said, what do you mean he's right? Ooh, I didn't think of that. Yeah, I guess you're right. The third guy comes along and says, how can they both be right? He says, you're also right. So how is it possible that man is created on the first day of Nisan and he's also created on the first day of Tishrei, and they're both true? How could that be? And it's an argument amongst great sages. One holds one way. Rabbi Eliezer says the man and the world were created on the first day of Tishrei. How can we say that the man is created on the first day of Nisan? And the answer is that you can think of a project and it can have a completeness in your mind. Like when Moshe Rabbeinu was in heaven and Hashem showed him that the Mishkan, how to build the Mishkan. He saw the whole thing. Did we have a Mishkan after that? Moshe saw the whole thing. He saw the menorah. He saw the altar. He saw the structure. He saw everything. Did we have a Mishkan?
No.
No, what did we have? We have the thought. It existed in a world of thought. So in the world of thought, man was created on the first day of Nisan. That's the answer to the question. But in actuality, we had to build the Mishkan, and that started on the day after Yom Kippur. That's when they started actually building it. Because Hashem doesn't just want our good thoughts, he wants our good deeds. Because the deed is the main thing. If you don't build the Mishkan, you're not going to have a Mishkan. You can understand everything about the mitzvah of tzedakah. Give over the deepest classes to your girlfriends about what tzedakah is all about. But if you don't give the poor person a quarter, you didn't do it. You don't have it. The deen is the main thing. But they come back together because on the day after Yom Kippur, on the day after Yom Kippur, they started to gather the materials to make all the donations, out of which they would build the Mishkan. Chana, I saw you built a Mishkan and with with the tongue depressors. Very nice, very, very nice. It was a group effort. It was a group effort, yeah. It reminds me of another story. It was a group effort. Anyway, when did they finish building the Mishkan? They were ready. They had everything. They were ready to build it on the 25th day of Kislev. And Hashem said, no, wait. 25th day of Kislev. Kislev has a different purpose. What's the purpose of 25th day of Kislev? Hanukkah. We had to save the building of the Mishkan for Hanukkah. That's why on Hanukkah we read every day about the building of the Mishkan.
Wow.
But the actual building of the Mishkan, when was it? When was it put up? We read about it in Parshas Shemini.
One day after Yom Kippur, they started.
That's when they started. When did they finish? When did they build it? And the fire came down from Hashem and consumed the offerings. And the people rejoiced because it meant that they'd been forgiven for the sin of the golden calf. It's a big verbringen. Well, what day was it? Take a wild guess. Rachel, take a wild guess. When did they actually put it up? Oh, come on. Jana, you must know.
I don't know if I do.
What's your guess?
Shavuos?
What, Shavuos? Warm.
23 or 25.
What?
23 or 25.
I don't hear you.
23 or 25 of Nisan, no?
No. A little warmer. Shavuos. Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So on the birthday of mankind, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Moshe Rabbeinu erected the Mishkan, and Hashem came down and accepted the offerings with a fire that came out of heaven. And we read about, and the people rejoiced. It was a big rejoicing. And so this is, you see how it all ties in. Starts with Hashem telling us to make Rosh Chodesh, and then once we know how to have a calendar, then on the 10th day of Nisan, we take a sheep and we tie it to our bedpost. And the Egyptians come along and they say, what are you doing with our God? We worship the sheep. We're going to have lamb chops. We're going to have a sheep roast, a lamb roast. We're going to have lamb. What? How are you going to do that? Well, we're going to slaughter it. We're going to roast it on a fire on the 14th in 2 weeks, 2 weeks' time. They were horrified, and they didn't know what to do. You'd think that a nation as powerful as that would rise up against the Jews and there'd be a big pogrom. No, they were terrified. They were terrified. They were afraid for their lives. After all, they'd had 10 plagues. They'd had 9 out of 10 plagues. They were up, and they knew that they were up against something very powerful, and they were very frightened. And said, now we're going to slaughter. The plague started with their first god, which was the Nile, that the Nile turned to blood. And now the 10th plague, they were threatening, we're going to have these lamb chops, and on the next, and that night, boy, if you're the firstborn in your family, it's bye-bye. You're not going to survive. All the firstborn are going to die. You may have read this, that in every family, there were many people that died, not just the firstborn. You know that. Why? Because there was such immorality. In every family, there were many firstborns. One mummy had many children from different people. And the first one from each boyfriend died that night. So that's how it all started with this mitzvah that we're going to read about this month. Now, the idea of Chodesh, the word Chodesh, the root word of the word Chodesh is Chiddush. A Chiddush is something new, a new idea. Well, this whole concept of doing mitzvah, making time, making things holy, is the idea of mitzvahs. We take an object and we use it to serve God, and we follow his commandment. The word commandment is mitzvah. So we're commanded. The word mitzvah means a mitzvah, a commandment. So by following Hashem's commandments, we take physical objects that do not display any godliness in them, and they become part of God's world. Not just part of the natural world, part of God's world. That's a big chiddush. That's a big change. So we make a big change in the physical world by doing mitzvahs. We can't do mitzvahs if we don't know what time it is. How do we know what time it is? Because we're given this commandment of sanctifying time. Time is the first creation. How do we sanctify time? We make Rosh Chodesh. We see the new moon and we say, this is the indication that this is the first day of a time sequence. And 29 and a fraction days later, we're going to start again. We're going to do it again. By the way, it's a very interesting phenomenon that the moon goes around the earth. The moon goes around the earth. As it goes around the earth, it rotates on its own axis, right? It spins. So as it's going around, it's spinning. You can imagine two wheels, one within the other. Okay, so the moon is going around, and as it's going around, it's spinning. You see this, Batya?
Which one?
The moon is going around, and as it goes around, it's spinning on its own axis. And it spins exactly 29 and a fraction days, it spins one whole time. And the same amount of time, the moon goes around the earth. So that means that the same side of the moon is always facing the earth. Now, since the moon is the beginning of time for the Jewish people, so we say that the Jewish people go by the moon. We're not sun people, we're moon people. Bunch of lunatics. Who are lunatics? Whether a lunatic is somebody who's, a bit meshugis, always, gazing at the moon. We go by the moon and we're compared to the moon. The Jewish people are compared to the moon. What's the moon? Why? How are we compared to the moon? That the moon has its ups and downs, so to speak. It's times of light and times of not light. So the moon starts from nothing, and it grows bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So to the Jewish people, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in any country in the world, in any time in history, no matter how hard it was for us when we had nothing. Think of your grandparents and great-grandparents, how they came to America and they had nothing, and they built themselves up. They build themselves up. That's characteristic of the Jewish people wherever they go. That's part of our character. That's why nations, as much as they dislike us, they want us, because we bring prosperity and industry and ethics and morals and good things wherever we go. So the moon builds itself up, but then we don't get proud, because when a person has a lot, he shrinks himself, he makes himself small. And the moon gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then it starts all over again. I want to say just one other thing. A very curious thing is if the source, and another thing about the moon is, and the Jewish people, with all the good things and the character of the Jewish people, and you could make a list of all the good characteristics of the people that we belong to, that we are part of. we know Jewish people are kind, they're generous, they're modest. These are basic characteristics of Jewish people. Even the animal soul has this character. They're merciful, has these characteristics in it. They tend to be creative, very creative. They tend to be studious. They tend to be good in business. They try very hard to be honest. They're industrious. They're good. A lot of good qualities to the Jewish people. But we always remember that the qualities that make us shine are not our own. We shine with a light. And here's Yana, we shine with a light that is not our own. Like the moon shines with the light of the sun. The moon does not create any light. It just reflects light. And the good qualities that the Jewish people bring wherever they go are not our qualities. They are the qualities that Hashem endows us with. And we have these because when we are facing the sun, we're full of the holiness. But the closer we get to the sun, the closer we get, the more holy a person becomes, the more he feels small before Hashem. So as big as we are, as we become, we always feel more and more small. When is the new moon? Remember, here's the sun. The sun isn't going anywhere with respect to the earth. So here's the sun, and the earth is going around the sun, and the sun's going around the earth, whatever. The earth is moving in an orbit before the sun. When the earth is furthest away from the sun, so the sun's full light is falling on the earth, what do we see? It's called a full moon. Now at this point, when is the earth closest to the sun? Here's the sun. Here's the sun. Here's the earth going around its orbit. When is it closest to the sun? When is it furthest from the sun? Now, when it's furthest away. So when a person seems furthest away from God, that's when the light of Hashem is shining on him full. But as he gets closer, then he makes himself small because he could think it's all from himself. But as he gets closer to the source of light, he gets less and less light on him because he's turning so that what we see as the full moon is now turned away from the earth, and the moon is getting its full light on the back of it, on its backside, when it's closest to the sun. So that the new moon really, when the moon is not visible, is when it's closest to the source of light. So a person, when he progresses and goes further and further in holiness and in knowledge and in mitzvahs and in service of Hashem, that's when he is smallest. When he makes himself most humble and feels insignificant before his creator. You know, like you can be a big chassid of the Rebbe, and you do all the Rebbe's mitzvahim, and you're gung-ho. Judy chassid, yeah, chassida. Full of the energy and enthusiasm of Hasidism, and then you have Yechidus. You go to the oil, or you stand in front of the Rebbe, and you feel nothing. How many times people go to the Rebbe for Sunday dollars, yeah? And they have so many questions, and when they stand in front of the Rebbe, they lose themselves. They just get totally lost. They can't say a word. Because that's like the moon comes closer to the sun, it has no light. When the moon has light, that's when it's furthest away. That's another reason why people like to go on shlichus to remote places. Because they know the further away they go from the Rebbe, if they're doing the Rebbe's Inyanim, that's when they have the light of the Rebbe more. Okay, there was a question, Ms. Gar.
In the beginning of time, when did Jewish people understand that they were aging, that they had time like everything else had time, we had time? When did they become aware that they were, aging, getting older?
That's a good question. When did you become aware that you were getting older?
The day I learned to walk.
When you learned how to walk.
Yeah, the day, that's specific.
That's the day you learned how to walk. Then you started to feel, I'm growing up. And your mother took a pencil and put it on top of your head and made a mark on the doorpost and put a little date. This is how tall you were. And a year later made another one. But on the first day of Nisan, the Jewish people became aware of the commandment to sanctify time. The time is a creation like every other thing in the universe. It's a spiritual creation. We can't hold it in our hands. It's something that is part of our world, but it's not something that we can hold on to. So therefore, like for instance, when is midnight? The 10th plague, the killing of the firstborn, happened exactly at midnight. When is exactly?
But there's not really midnight.
When exactly is midnight? Any time is either before midnight or it's after midnight. Midnight is a split. It's not even a split second. It's a split of a split of a split of a split. There's no. It doesn't have a physical reality. So this is a phenomenon that we can see in many places in mitzvahs, but it's a profound lesson that even though Hashem is creating a physical world, he's not part of this world. He gives life to the whole world, but the world cannot contain him. Sort of like the lights of Hanukkah that they burned and they didn't burn. This one vial of oil lasted 8 days. Or like the bush, the burning, when Hashem revealed himself to Moshe in the burning bush, he saw a bush that was burning and it wasn't burning. Burning and not burning at the same time. So time is passing and it's nothing. So at the split second of midnight, that's when the plague took place and all the firstborn died. Because Hashem, and then it happened again when the Jews crossed the Red Sea. Hashem was making the sea and he was making it not sea at the same time. And the Jews went through the sea like it was dry land. And the Egyptians pursued them, but to them, they weren't on that level. So the water drowned them. At the same time as the Jews were going through on I-90, the Egyptians were drowning. The Jews were going on in a paradise kind of experience, and the chariots of the Egyptians were getting stuck in the mud.
So it's like a parallel of time.
It's maybe a spiral of time. Time works in a spiral. It doesn't work just linear. We return to the same point, like in orbit. Only each ring of the spiral is higher than the one before. So the word shana, which is a year, means to repeat. Like when you learn, v'shinan tam levanecha, teach them to your children. Shana means to teach by repetition. Mishnah, learn the laws of the Torah, stated in the Mishnah. The oral Torah is in the Mishnah. Mishnah is repetition of the law that explains it. So we operate in time, but time, at the same time, it connects us with something that's above time, which is Hashem. that Hashem is not limited by time. Hashem creates time. It's above time. Okay. That's some of the ideas about Parshas HaChodesh. So we're going to read this Shabbos. And we read it this Shabbos to prepare ourselves for the beginning of our lives as a Jewish nation, of a nation of priests and a kingly people, a royal people, which started on the first day of Nisan, when Hashem pointed out the moon to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, Moshe, this is how you should do it when you sanctify the new moon. This is how it's going to look. And therefore, according to Jewish law, we need witnesses. Witnesses, two people or two eyewitnesses, as opposed to hearsay. It's not enough to hear about the new moon, you have to see it. And the people who see it have to come to the Beis Din in Yerushalayim, to the Sanhedrin, and testify. And they interrogate them. Because there were opponents of the sages, of the oral law, who used to try and fake it and make the law work out the way they wanted it to work out. Then there was a whole big machlokes, confrontation and a disputation about when Shavuos should come. It says, L'machras HaShabbos, on the day after Shabbos, you should start counting 49 days till Shavuos. So the literalists said that means the day after Shabbos. Because it says the day after Shabbos, you start counting, but Shabbos also means Yom Tov. And the tradition that we received from Mount Sinai is that this means we start counting the 49 days on the day after Pesach, which is also called Shabbos. So because if they do it their way, that we start counting the 7 weeks on the day after Shabbos, then Shavuos will always be on Shabbos, and that's very nice. The Torah was given on Shabbos, so we're going to always celebrate the giving of the Torah on Shabbos. There's only one problem, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be 49 days after Pesach. So they would fake it. They would actually hire or pay false witnesses to come to court to say that they sighted the moon on Thursday or Friday, so that Rosh Chodesh would be on Shabbos, so that Shavuos would be 7 weeks later on Shabbos. So Pesach would be on Shabbos. It's a big disputation in the Torah between those who convey to us the oral law, what it really means, and those who have throughout the centuries have tried to denigrate the oral law and relegate it to a non-usage, like the Reform movement. Say, we have our rabbis, so we can interpret things differently. So it goes on. It's never ending. Anyway, there you are. It all begins when Hashem pointed out, said, this is the moon, and therefore we have to have two people who come who saw the moon and can tell us where they saw it and what it looked like and which way the horns were pointing and how high it was in the sky and what time of the day was it when it arose. The scholars of old had to be very great astronomers, because they knew exactly for the next 1,000 years exactly how the new moon was going to take place and where it would be and exactly what time it would be and what color it would be and all these things. There you are. This Shabbos, which gives a new lift, a chiddush and a new lift to everything that we do in the service of Hashem.
Thank you.
Because the fact that Hashem gave us mitzvahs, this is the first mitzvahs to sanctify time. The fact that he gave us mitzvahs, that changed the world.
Thank you.
That brought us into a new world.
Amen.
And even though we did it last year, but what we're going to have this year is not going to be even comparable to what we did last year. It'll be as if we never had it before.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you.
I find that very exciting. If I didn't get the feeling yet. What?
I'm gonna go. Ahora sí me puedes hablar.